All right, good evening, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me. This is the 21st lecture of Helping the Helpers. Should be copies of everything on Rumble. Some of them have already been deleted by YouTube. But tonight we're going to be talking on breaking the rut. What to do when a person is in a continual loop. Okay, what to do? How do you handle it? And hi, Gina. And so here's what I mean by continual loop. Um, have you ever heard of somebody that their life is completely out of control and they have no hope for change? They have given up. For instance, a person that is trapped in a bed, 800 to, my wife was telling me about a person that weighed over 900, it was in the Guinness Book of Records, 900 or 1,200 pounds overweight. And they died just 2 weeks after being filmed. But the person had basically ate themselves to death. They had lost their life many years before because their obesity took over and they were unable to just stop eating. And restaurants had keys to his home and would bring the food directly to his bedside. How about somebody that doesn't bathe, or they quit bathing or cutting their hair and they try to hide their face with glasses and they tape over the windows and they try to make everything as dark as possible? Or another person that can't go home. They just live on the streets or in graveyards, or, sometimes they choose, interestingly enough, sometimes they'll choose parking lots of grocery stores. You say, well, why? Is it a demonic stronghold, or is it a abrasive tear, what they call where the fabric in the mind has become torn, and so it will take on overt actions which are simple enough in their own terms, but they become exaggerated and basically take over the entire life of the individual. So we're going to discuss that. And what it's called, it's like a continual loop. When a person becomes in a trapped condition, it is called a continual loop. Father, I do pray and ask that you would bless this meeting tonight. I pray that you'd speak to the hearts and minds of everyone here. Lord, grant us wisdom and knowledge. Liberally upbraideth it not. It's in Jesus' name I do pray. Amen. Friends, there are hundreds, if not tens of thousands, of different ways that avoidance issues and what we call being mentally trapped can happen. They each have their own reason for being, their own significance. And so none of them are quite unique because they have an underlying tie, something that they all share in common. Now, let me give you an example. The brain is the most complicated computer that has ever been. And as a result, the brain being the most complicated that has ever been, it has functions far beyond the typical computer. But in computer programming, there is what is called a command statement. And what you can do is you can create from a command prompt with command statement, you can create what's called a go-to or a continual loop. And that means the program goes this far. And if this happens, then it does this. If this happens, then it does this. And if this happens, it goes all the way back to the beginning and starts it again and runs through the things and just keeps going through it like a loop. Well, this go-to loop or command will make the whole process go back to the beginning and start over. Now, many times in psychology, you will find an individual that has become trapped. And they don't realize it, but the trap is in the uncognitive, that means the lower part, from the mid to lower back part of the brain. And as a result of becoming trapped, it is trapped in what's called a continual cycle, just like the go-to loop with a regular computer. Now, the thing is in computers, you program them to do it so you can control the setting and control the outcome. Well, unfortunately, in the brain isn't developed to do that. The brain's number one and primary goal is existence. See, your brain just wants your body to live. It doesn't care if your personality's able to intermingle with the world around outside of you. It doesn't care if you find glamour in going on cruise ships or flights or doing something dynamic with your life. Your brain doesn't even care if you go outside to go grocery shopping once a year and hide inside or in a cellar the rest of the time. What the brain wants more than anything is to protect the body and stay alive. So the brain will have response mechanisms that actually can become a detriment. And instead of giving the person freedom or giving them the ability to live a better life, it takes and goes the opposite way and becomes that which begins destroying the person's life rather than protecting them. And it does this, and it only does this when the person has been placed in a position to where the life has been threatened. Now, let me explain that. A person, when their brain feels like it has been threatened in such a way that the individual will not be able to handle it, it will dissociate. We're going to get into that. But when it has an abrasive tear in the fabric, you see, it's one thing to disassociate and create a very multifaceted fabric that's beautiful and has all kinds of abilities, because disassociates tend to be on the smarter end of the scale, and they tend to be multi-talented. But when you get an abrasive tear, that means there's a gap now that's been created, and everything stretches the wrong way. Instead of being symmetrical, it becomes bent out of proportion. Sometimes it can even fold, and when it does that, it gets trapped, usually trapped right in that center point. Now, let me explain this. First thing I want to address is the person themselves. When somebody gets trapped, and even something as simple as hoarding is one of these continual go-to, it's an inability to let anything go because there's been a great loss already in their life, but we'll get to that. So the person will have the problem, and many times if you discuss it with them, they will say that they just can't break the habit, that they don't know why usually. They don't understand. They just feel compelled and unable to change their life. And they may even say that they've tried many times, but nothing has ever worked. Well, the truth of the matter is, I believe it is a demonic stronghold, but I also believe there has been great injury or insult or an abrasive tear into the psyche. And I'm going to explain why. The truth of the matter is, that person cannot break that pattern on their own. You see, the strong man must be bound. You need two people to be in agreement, and that means the counselor has to have rapport with the counselee. Whoever they're trying to help has to trust in them and agree with them when they take this endeavor or this joining together to help that person get freedom. Well, I have had, here's some of the things that I've had to confront before even working with the person. I was told to go to a home because of a woman who was a hoarder, and her daughters wanted to intervene, but the husband wouldn't allow it. And so I went to talk to the husband and to the wife, and he broke down and finally decided to let me in. Friends, it was the most disgusting thing I'd ever seen. Now I know why they would rent a home for a year and then move. This woman would find baby diapers and just bring them home and stick them into compartments, the tote, and she had the walls lined. The basement was filled with poopy diapers and things that had poop on them. Now, that's a serious mental illness. What's worse is her children were raised with her having this problem. Her husband tried to hide it and not let anyone know. And it wasn't until the one daughter got out of the house, she became old enough to move out on her own, that she came to me and asked if I would intervene. And I did. But here's the thing. When the husband confronted me, he says, why don't you mind your own business? This is none of your business. She's happy living like this. And I said, well, are you happy living like this? Do you think it's right that she's got 2 grandchildren and 2 daughters and they can't bring their kids over here because of the way the mother would act? The mother was severely mentally ill. Now, she wasn't always like that. Something snapped in her about 4 years previous, which had caused her to go into this pattern. What had happened 4 years earlier? Her daughter had a grandchild. 2 years later, she had another one. Something with the poopy diaper of the grandchild triggered the woman. What it was she had a child that had died. It was first child. And the idea of a poopy diaper made her think that the baby was still there somewhere. Gave her something to hold on to. It's pretty sick, to be honest. But she needed somebody that would help her. So you'll get confronted with people that are going to ask you why you want to help that person. They'll tell you to leave them alone. That's how they want to live. But the truth of the matter is nobody really wants to live that way. An agoraphobic can't help the fact that they can't go outside. When people have something that holds them and holds their life in check, or worse, they have a pattern that they go through every day, the same thing over and over. There may be small variations, but they're trapped and non-functional. They will feel helpless and they will feel hopeless. And they are, unless you intervene. And I'm telling you, the only way that they can be helped is through the power of Jesus Christ. I don't apologize for being a Christian counselor. I'm going to give you the psychology, but I'm telling you, the real change comes through the power of prayer and leading them in prayer for forgiveness to others and things. So let me get in this. You need to be the minister of Christ to them. God works through his children. You are the light. They are trapped, literally. When somebody has one of these things I've described, they are trapped in a mental prison from which they see no way of escape. They feel like their life is over. They are basically being carried or swept along by the elements that control them. So their desire to change, and this is important to understand, their will. And how do you know their will has been broken? Because they're trapped. One of the first ways to identify if somebody's will has been broken, because they may come in for an application, want to work with you, and they will smile and everything else. But you see, when somebody's will has been broken, they will do a set pattern, and they will do it according to whatever's controlling them. Okay? Now, when a person is no longer in control of their life, they do need, if there's anything human around them, they need somebody to intervene. They need outside intervention. So when do you know that you might need to intervene or get involved in their life? Well, the first thing is when they are no longer living their life, but they're simply enduring it. What do you mean? Well, when somebody has, eaten so much that they're unable to leave their bed, they're no longer living life. And matter of fact, they're not only a slave, but somebody's having to clean up their mess and bring them food because these people are eating all but maybe an hour or two a day. If somebody is hoarding and they grab and they hold on to everything and they meticulously stack it and place it, they're no longer living life. They are trapped. When you've got a child or an adult that just can't bathe or brush their teeth, man, I ran into many of those people. I used to work at the mission, and a lot of those people were on the street, and they would say it was because they were schizophrenic. Well, you could say they were, but they were demonized. And when you got the curses and the removed from them, the demons out of them, they got back in their right mind. They went out and became productive. And by productive, what do I mean? One, they're able to get food and shelter and clothing and the necessities of life. But they're not only able to get it, they want to get it. The desire to live and acquire the things you need is there. Second way you will know that they are not living is they no longer contribute to or even want to be a part of society. And when they are a part, they're typically a detriment. I've known people that are afraid to go out of their homes. A person trapped in the basement, 42 years old. There comes a point. Problem is if the parents don't break the cycle early, you get to be in your 70s and the child's almost 50, might be a little bit late. They no longer contribute to society. They're no longer a positive part of it, but rather they're a detriment. Now, you'll say, well, I know people that have gone off and lived in the woods or the mountains or Alaska by themselves. One of the things that you need to understand is when somebody has a brooding or a dark complexion and they like to separate from society, it's because they have sociopathic tendencies. And when I say tendencies, I mean they will have thoughts in the back of their head. They will have antisocial personalities, not personalities plural, like in a different personality, but they'll have antisocial personality characteristics and or attributes, which means they may have brooding or thoughts about being a predator or a hunter, or malicious thoughts they can't control. They separate for a reason. Man is an animal, like a horse or others, that is not only tribal, but we are designed for social interaction. The third reason why you would want to intervene is because their life has become meaningless. It has no purpose or direction. Now, for instance, if you find a hoarder or somebody that doesn't want to bathe or clean themselves, one of the things is they may say that they don't need help. Ask them if their life has meaning. Tell me, what is the meaning in your life? Tell me what it is. Why are you alive? What is your meaning, and what purpose do you have with that? I'd like to know what your daily thoughts are, your goals, because you might have to convince them that they need help. And you say, what direction is your life taking? You see, hiding indoors is no meaning. That's being trapped. When I was head chaplain in Illinois over several facilities, one of the things I noticed is long-term inmates, after 15, 20 years, they would be afraid to leave. They wouldn't tell other people that, but they were. And so it was not uncommon at all for them to do something within the first 2 to 3 days to get put back in prison. And that's because they were afraid of being outside. This is why I call it trapped conditioning. It is a seed bed with a full root cellar hidden underneath it of psychosocial disorder potential. Okay? When you see these characteristics or attributes being played out or lived out in a person's life, it tells you that they have not only a seed bed, but underneath it, that's what you don't see. And it's like an iceberg. It's much bigger underneath. That is what we call social disorder potential. Now, the potential's there to be just about anything, depending on what you have for ingredients here. But all it takes is a spark to ignite it. Okay? That's why a lot of those people with the super brooding issues, and I use that term for them, will go out and try to live in the woods and separate from society. Okay? The third reason, and we're just about done here, is if they ask you for help, you should give it to them if possible. If you know that you can't help them, then refer them, okay, to somebody that can. Because anybody that is responsible, the highest form, or if you want to know when man has reached the apex of civilization, it is when they take care of each other. When they have lost their humanity and reached the lowest, it is when they stop caring for each other and they don't care if you live or die. That is when they have lost humanity. So, Let's discuss retraumatization and its effects. If a person comes to you for counseling, but instead of getting better, they get worse. For instance, I've worked on a lot of people that have been in counseling for 18, some 27 years. One lady for 29 years. And guess what? After 3 or 4 months, they were not counseling anymore. They didn't need it. Why? Because they can get conditioned and made worse if the counseling's done in the wrong way. And their counselors didn't know how to do it the right way. They thought they did. They charged her a lot of money. I mean, she was paying out $500 to $1,000 a week. If a person comes to you for counseling, instead of getting better, they get worse, the most common reason for this is one, release and attachment, or two, retraumatization. So I'm going to explain what both of these things are, but first I have to address what is called the original insult or the bruise to the psyche. These are terms that are used for mind-body connection in psychology. We're going to discuss the Occidental Separation. You're going to say, wait a minute, Occidental, that's a word that means separating Europe from America or the Western Hemisphere from the Eastern Hemisphere. And you'd be correct. That is one. That is the normal term. But in psychology, it describes the difference, that which separates the conscious mind from the unconscious mind. That's why it's called Occidental. It is an uncognitive preservation mechanism. So the Occidental separation point, it begins right at the sixth layer of the brain back here. Here's the central fissure point. The effulgence of the life force comes out of the brainstem. And that circle right there at the base, if you put your thumb, you're going to find a spot of depression. That is the Occidental separation point. And what it does is it controls where the life force goes into the brain. So when somebody detaches, they pull back. The life force pulls back to here. That's one example. But within Occidental separation, it happens and it controls what's called an uncognitive preservation mechanism, which means it's something that switches on and you're not aware of it. It does it automatically. Now, what happens is it will take, when it is triggered, and it will instantly sever the connection between the front, or what we call presenting conscience, where the mind, 12% of the mind lives, from the unconscious back here. It does not separate the mind to 88% of the unconscious, or if you believe it's only 84%, whatever. No, it goes farther back than that to just the base of about 65 to 70% of the mind, which is the unconscious and no conscious. So what happens is it will separate the conscious and the unconscious. And in this separation point, what is going to be severed is the amount of information, which will be partitioned, the amount of information that the mind will allow a person to be consciously aware of. The unconscious mind will work with the brain, and it will control what it will allow that person to know. Let me explain. This is how it works. It begins with the original point of insult or the bruising, and it happens to the first layer of the identity. You're probably familiar, if you've got any college training, with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. The first layer of the identity is that first layer. The developing infant, it has to have security. It has to feel secure. How does a baby feel secure? By being held and nurtured. Neglect or isolation or leaving a child is the most traumatic thing that can happen to an infant, even above that of pain. Why? Because the mind does not know what to do when it's left to itself in a developing infant. So the security has got to be there. It has to have the provisional food at regular intervals. It has to be cleaned. Its needs have to be met. And it has to have touch and eye contact. Now, there are specific decibels that work within not only the child, but also the mother. They have a symbiotic wave connection because the child came from her. That's why when she hears the child cry at night, she will wake up. It will also cause her to produce milk. They are connected. But in the same faction, the things that would hurt the mother will hurt the child. So, what happens? Let me describe what would be called the initial trauma. And I'm talking now about people with GOTOOP or what I call trapped conditioning. Prior to around the age or circa 7 years of age for boys and girls, in order for this to happen, the child must be witness to or subject to an event that is too stressful for the individual's mind to endure. For instance, neglect, isolation. I worked on an individual. He was a grown man. He's from a successful family. And when I got to his problem, for punishment, they would put him in a closet and lock it with no lights for not one, not two, but 3, 4, once for 5 days straight. Okay? And he had abuse on top of that. It caused a tearing, a rupture within the psyche. So prior to the age of 7, I'm going to describe how you'll know when the event happened. When the event is too stressful for the individual's mind to endure, in order to prevent the developing mind of the child from becoming disabled, okay, like mutism, blindness, deafness, and when the brain selectively disengages that, and it actually happens, there's a reason. The movie Tommy by the Who was based on that. He had seen something so traumatic that he went blind and mute, deaf and dumb. Okay? The sense of smell. I've worked with people who can't smell, and it's everything, the all finger, everything works, but the brain refuses to make the connection. It's because they were put in a position where they were corpses, and they had to hide amongst the corpses and the stench, and it caused a tear in the fabric of the mind. All right. So the brain, in order to prevent the developing mind from being disabled, the brain working with the unconscious mind, not the conscious, but the unconscious, it will separate the presenting conscience up here from the event. And here's how it happens. And I know some of you are very familiar with this. Bear with me. Number one, it first detaches them emotionally. Okay? It will detach them emotionally, and this starts in the bowels, down here in your guts, believe it or not. That's the first brain from 0 to 3 years of age. Everything's stored in the guts. From the age of 3 to 5, it's in the heart. After the age of 5, it begins ascertaining and taking the brain. Now, it will first detach the individual from the emotions. It will then detach them from the heart. They have 2 different feelings and they cover 2 different regions. These are storage centers for memory. So what it says is, whoa, I'm going to detach from that and I'm going to choose how I'm going to store this memory. Depending upon the memory and the age of the child, if the child is between the ages of 0 and 3, it will separate that memory from what's going to be allowed to go up into the presenting conscience. It will separate that memory from what will be allowed to go into the presenting conscience. And it will store it in a different place, in a modeling center. That's what the psychological term is. And it's like a box with calcium deposits that are opened by the influx of potassium and sodiums. So it will separate it like a zip drive or a fragment taken. Now, if the person is between the ages of 3 and 5, it will separate the information from the presenting conscience and it will store it in the heart. This is important because if the person's 20-something years old and they come to you, they're going to say, I don't know why I have these feelings. I don't know why I have this condition, this phobia, this addiction, this obsession. I don't know why. Well, if it's of the mental stuff, that means it's between the ages of 3 and 5 and it's located in the heart. If it's of the anxieties, it will be in the intestines. So the first thing it does is it detaches. It does not allow the person to have any memory storage that is in the continual connection. This detachment will then depersonalize the event. So what does it mean? It now has detached it from everything that will become a part of that person. So as it's building and creating the identity, this will be left out over here and placed in its own modeling center. It will then create for that modeling center a separate personality. This is called an alter or an alternate personality. It will become the modeling center for that event. If it's being put in a closet for 5 days, the next time it will go right to there and separate it from the conscious mind. Okay? That is called dissociative identity disorder. Now, that zip drive, which is what I like to refer to it as, will look and be the age of the individual when the traumatic event happened. So first it becomes with detachment disorder, then depersonalization disorder, then dissociative identity disorder. They always go in that order because it'll detach from the emotions, then from the person, their identity, and then it will create another one to take and be the identity. Now, this newly formed alter or alternate personality will do one of three things. It will either surrender to the event and adapt, learning how to survive by endurance. In a closet, the child might create his own fantasy world. And then the next time he's out, the brain will memorize the next movie or album. So if he's put in that position, he can watch that movie over and over in his head. And then he depersonalizes it so he's not afraid of being in there. He's actually not even in there anymore. He's gone into his fantasy world. Well, somebody's still got to be with the body. So it creates an alternate personality that sits in the darkness and waits for somebody to open the door so it can try to get out. So one, it will either surrender to the event, separate and store those moments over here, or two, it will try to fight back. But that is almost never the case because the child fears and knows it can't help itself, which is what breaks the will of the child. So the last thing it can do is shut down. If it shuts down, the child will withdraw, pull into a fetal position, and just shut down. It's a form of catanesis or schizophrenia or withdrawal, extreme withdrawal. I had a person brought to me that was like that. I had a teenager once brought to me that was completely shut down. So, if the event only occurs once, it will manifest prior to the age of 3 as a nervous or anxiety disorder or a phobia. If it happens more than once, it will develop into a full personality. See, the more times it happens, the more shape and configuration, what we call solidarity, it will make that alternate personality become more and more real every time it happens. Now, if the event occurs between the ages of 3 and 5, it will manifest itself as an image or an identity disorder or an antisocial personality pattern potential, which means they show characteristics and traits in the antisocial, psychosocial, narcissistic, social disorder scale. Okay? So that'll tell you about what age. It's between 3 and 5 if you're dealing with the mind being wrong. Okay, if it happens more than once, they call that ritual occurrence, ritual event, or ritual abuse. Then it will develop more and more until it becomes its own full personality. And it will take on a name according to whatever it was called or addressed as during the event. This is important to understand this. Because the first thing that'll happen is the personality will try to meet the demands of whatever the event calls for. But if the personality is unable to meet the demands of the event, that personality will then split into more than one. This is called fragmentation. So the person gets put in a closet, so the mind separates. He goes into fuge over here and watches a movie, while this child's sitting in utter darkness, afraid. All the fears are trapped in him. Because now every time he gets stuck in the closet, this guy escapes over here. This one's here. But when they would hang him by his wrists and have his brother beat him with a whip till he would almost pass out from blood, he started fusing outside. And then this personality, because of the pain, split into several others, 4 others. It's called fragmentation. Now, in order to protect the mind, fragmentation does this. It says, whoa, there's too much trauma going into this one personality. I will die if I have to remember this or know it may happen again. So it splits the memories up between the other personalities. So no one personality has it all. One personality may just have the anger or the rage. One may have the pain, like, oh, my stomach hurts. And I've seen that happen many times for no reason. One may take on the attributes which cause them not to want to take care of themselves or to do things that are reckless, like borderline personality disorder. So they're called splinter cells. The fragmentation, each one of those fragments is called a splinter cell. Each splinter cell in a fragment will hold the particular part of the event. One will hold the who's who's. In other words, it will know who all was there. One will hold the location and where the settings of the event. One will hold the particulars of the event. One will hold all the pain. One will hold the fear. One will hold the hopelessness and helplessness. Because of this, it will create what is black and white thinking, because the brain, and this is why black and white thinking is predominant in dissociative patterns or psychosocial disorders or antisocial disorders or narcissistic personality. It'll create a black and white thinking pattern to combat, or in other words, to keep from having what's called discombobulation. This one will always take care of this. This one will always take care of the other thing. This one takes care of his part. So it's a hyper-synchronization. So when you get to this personality, it will split in up to 6 other parts or 12 other parts. And each one of them will carry a little piece. And so they all have to come together to create the one. Here's the thing. While each fragment cell is separated, if you go and talk to that personality, it won't know the details, maybe. It might only know the faces. It might not know what happened. It might not be afraid. It might be happy. It might be friends with a demon, because you have to put them all together to get the full picture. That is why they created the kaleidoscope. Each cell fragment is a different piece, and they have to all come together into a single personality to get all the information. And when the event is over, they fragmentize and go back. So there's no memory. It's all a bunch of little bits of data floating around into these different modeling centers. So that's how they create the kaleidoscope. In mind control programming, they will train the mind to combine. It's called layering, to combine the fragments that are needed to make each personality. So you can have a supermodel who takes care of her man just the right way because she's very elite, sophisticated, knows what she's doing. You can have the one that's great at mixing poisons, one that's an incredible secretary. She can type and do everything you need. You can have all these different personalities. And they will be made up from fragments, a whole pool of different fragments that come together to create one. So when it goes back, it separates, and the other person comes back up, because the presenting conscience fuses, goes to sleep, and goes down when this one comes up. Now, what they do is they can train it to pull together the right ones with key phrases, key words, or locations or events. That's called layering. So it's like taking a picture and cutting it into a bunch of pieces. And then you just take the pieces and separate them, and there's no memory because it's all split up. But if you put it back together, it becomes that alternate personality, and it has the memory, the knowledge, the faces, the location, what happened. That's how the data bits of the information come together. Now, wow, I didn't realize it would take this long. Okay, let's move on a little bit quicker here. So we understand now how the mind separates and stores the information. So let's look into the problems that can occur when you're working with someone. The first is called release and attachment. Release and attachment is what happens when memories are released from a kaleidoscope and they can't get back down to where they were because it closes up when those come out, unless they do a job. For instance, if a counselor goes down and works with a specific event, and he takes care of the event but not the personality, it's got nowhere to go. Its modeling system has been closed down. And so it has been released. Well, if that event happened in its teen years or preteen years, and they're now in their 50s or 40s, it can't create a personality to take that spot because it's not that age. If it did, it would be its own age. So the mind reflects its current age. So what it does is it attaches to the presenting conscience. And then it tries to take over it. It's called the doppelganger effect. So if you've got a child that has been sexually molested, it feels dirty, especially if it's been called a dirty girl or a whore or some other bad name. And that memories from that alternate personality that was developed are released, and it does not have the ability to go back to the modeling or the shell center. It attaches to the presenting conscience. The presenting conscience cannot deal with the trauma that just brought to it. So it creates another personality, but it'll be the age that person is now. And since it can't be in the same place with the other one, it goes into fugue or sleep. And the personality that's been released takes over the mind. Now, how does this get affected by words that are spoken? Curses or words that are spoken during the time of the event or the trauma that took place. For instance, this is an actual case, and I won't say any names, but I knew a woman and it had been since her mid to late teens. She was basically a whore. She would sleep with anyone. And she would, if she got stressed, she would go find people to sleep with. She then got married, had kids. She couldn't stop. Why? Because when her father would molest her and rape her, and he didn't do it just once or twice, he did it for quite a while. He would tell her how she was nothing but a dirty whore, and that's all she would ever be good for. That's called trapped conditioning. And it's called speaking the curse upon them, because the person will become whatever they are called. When it is attached to a traumatic event, somebody that's supposed to protect you, love you, and care for you is hurting you now and doing bad things, because everybody knows what's right or wrong, because the way the Lord has created us is in his image. So what happens is when curses are spoken, the words that are spoken at the time of the event of the trauma taking place will become embedded into the complete event, which means that trauma, that event will become attached to those words. Now, this is called kinetic, or what we would call biokinetics or kinesiology. Okay. They call them neurolinguistic programming, or the magic words in neurolinguistic programming. And that is a correct statement. It is a form of neurolinguistic programming, because you are taking and causing trauma and pain and dissociative condition, and the brain will automatically label it whatever the words are spoken at that time. So those become triggering words. Okay? They also can be called cueing words. Triggering is when it happens and you don't want it to happen. Cueing is when it happens and somebody's programmed. Like, here, kitty, kitty. Or one man after dinner would go and molest. He had a set of twins, and he would always stand up and do eeny, meeny, miny, mo, and the one girl knew it was going to be her every time, because it always was. And she would automatically switch, and so would the mother. Her eyes would glaze over, and she'd start humming and doing the dishes while he went back there and brutally assaulted and raped his daughter. So these become triggering words, and what it means is it will trigger the body to have specific memories. Now, if it's prior to the age of 3, it will be in the form of fear, anxiety, panic, paranoia, rejection. They will have self-distorted images because they've been rejected, and it has to be for them, because everything is egocentrical in the first part of life. The first 3 to 5 years is all egocentrical. So what happens is when these get released, if you've had a personality down here that was trapped, say the guy molested the child until it was 6 or 7, or he did it a few times, or was an uncle that visited, they become trapped to that personality. And if that modeling center isn't dealt with properly and it escapes, but they've cleaned out this, it will go and attach to the presenting conscious. And now you've got a wounded 6-year-old or 12-year-old or teenager attached to a 40 or 50 or 30-something-year-old, and it's going to try to have a stronger will and put them to sleep. And because of what their baggage is that they're bringing with them, the frontal lobes will say, hey, I can't handle that. And they'll have memories slapping through, flashing, of a father saying the wrong thing or doing the wrong thing, or an uncle or a pastor or a minister, a brother. And they'll have flashes and fragments of memory. The brain only takes so much, and it'll start slowly developing and taking over them. Here's a couple examples of people I've worked with that have had this problem. One, she literally was nasty. She was dirty. She wasn't trying to have sex. She was filthy, and she would smell and not brush her teeth and not shower and not do her clothes. And it's because she was literally called a dirty whore and stuff while being molested by her father and grandfather. So she began becoming that. And when the memory started leaking out, she quit bathing and quit showering. Or how about you stink? They will start stinking literally. Or you never do anything. They'll quit. They'll lose the desire to work and function and become shut in. So you can call it speaking curses upon the person, and that would be correct. Demonization happens, but it's also trapped conditioning. It's conditioning of the mind so that it will become those things. Now, when it's attached to a traumatic event and it gets released, it will attach to the front conscious. The front conscious will only take so much. It will disassociate and give itself over to that. And it usually takes 9 to 10 week period before the person's will starts giving into this and they transform. They will change identities. In other words, a person who may have been glamorous or very active in life will suddenly become reclusive, quit bathing, quit showering, quit taking care of themselves. A person who maybe once was healthy will all of a sudden develop a super eating disorder. A person who was usually bold and confident may become very cowardly. It can take many different forms. So it will try, the fragmented personality that is released will try to take over the presenting conscience. It will attach to it and then assert its position because it doesn't want to go back down. There's no place for it there. And so it will take over, and while it dwells at the top, it will try to fuse the other person. It will begin slowly at first. For instance, they'll get up in the middle of the night, maybe hit the refrigerator, grab a few things. They'll wake up and won't understand why they feel full, but they'll still get their coffee and donut on the way to work. It'll start then coming out in different times of the day. So that's called release and attach. The second is through retraumatization. Now, here's the reason why I don't like theophostic counseling. People will say, well, theophostic comes from theos for God and phostic for light or phobia or photon, right? So it means you reveal the truth by going in and finding the lies and confronting them. Well, I'm all about confronting lies with truth. I use the scriptures. But here's the thing. In theophostics, you take the person back to the event and you have them relive it. It's almost like the counselor gets curious and wants to know all the details. The Bible is very clear. We have to leave those things that are behind and press forward towards the mark of the higher calling. You don't want people to relive it. I had a counseling center with 3 guys, all with masters, and they had a center in New Jersey. And they called me, and they said, you seem to, we were referred to you. They said, here's the case. We've got a lady, she's a dissociative, and we keep getting stuck working with a 5-year-old, and we've integrated it probably 100 times. It doesn't go away. Why? I said, well, tell me, how are you counseling? They were theophostic. And I said, here's the deal. Every time you go in and take her through the ordeal, and then you integrate that altar, you just re-traumatize that person. And the brain and mind create another altar and put that memory right back in there. You see, they don't need to remember. If you find out that someone molested them and they have an interject, the interject, which is the demon attached to the person, will always look like that person. But you just lead them in a prayer to Jesus to forgive that person and to cleanse them from all unrighteousness, to sever them from all unholy ties and attachments, and to remove the demonic interject, and that they forgive that person. You see, by forgiving the person, it releases them from the demonic stronghold. You have to do that. But here's another thing, and this is the most important thing you'll probably get out of this. You have to ask the Lord to cut the seals on the individual. So if it's a 5-year-old, it grows up and becomes the same age as the person you're working with. Because otherwise you can't integrate it. It'll stay in that modeling center. The seal is the modeling center. That's the stronghold. And you'll have to find out when something is sealed in like that, it means there's been a sin committed, a violation committed, something that has traumatized the brain to the point of separation. So re-traumatization will cause an individual to get worse. Why? Because the brain, as it creates new personality to go back and take the place of the old one, the person up here is now aware of what's happened. And once they become aware, every time you go in there, those words that were spoken while they were abused, just like hypnotic suggestion, now become reinforced and exponentiated every time you go through it in the lower part of the brain. That is where the brain box is. And if you know anything about hypnotherapy, those suggestions change the way the frontal person works. And so what will happen is over a 2-year period, the person will become what you're trying to take out of them. I stood against people that teach theophostic counseling, and they didn't like it. There's a lot of money in books when they charge for it and in counseling. But the thing is when you cause someone to relive the experience, it re-traumatizes them. And the more it happens, the more it affects the frontal lobes, because down here in the no conscious part of the brain, it's becoming reinforced every bad thing they go through. That's why if you notice when I counsel, I do big brush strokes. I don't want to know any details. I just want forgiveness and healing. All right, I apologize for the length of this. And what we will do is in the next session, we will cover how to remove. Oh, thank you, Gina. We're going to do a whole session on that in the next one. Number 22 will be my counseling method, okay? All right. Lord bless you all, and I pray that this has helped. And if you have any more questions, please type them out, and I'll try to get to them. All right. In Christ's love, Dr. Tom. Thank you.